Chapter 1. Are you awake? He sat up on a wooden bed, not the dining room table, in an enormous room lit by piles of glowing purple rocks. The ceiling and walls were clear, like huge windows. He looked out to a strange planet, suspended in space. Hundreds of people were walking or lying down on wooden beds. To one side of Kenneth, a thin, pale girl with tangled snow-white hair sat staring at him with big blue eyes. Her dainty face looked peaceful, her smile kind. Her purple skirt lay politely over her lap, falling onto the floor. Though her white polo shirt was old and small, the collar lay neatly open with the top button left unbuttoned. "Hi," the girl said softly. Kenneth stared at her, puzzled, as he asked, "Where am I?" He couldn't make sense of where he was. He had never seen this place before in real life. He couldn't be dreaming. It was too real. But why wasn't he in his house? "This is a shelter. There are thousands of these. They're sort of domes orbiting planets in space," she replied, an accent becoming noticeable. "I'm Halo Evans. Halo means moonlight." She laughed a little, but her cheeks glistened with tears. "I'm Kenneth Davis. What is this place, and why am I here?" he rambled. He wasn't quite sure why he shook, but he did, and that made him feel worse. "Well, as I said, this is a shelter," Halo replied. "You've been here 17 hours, and I'm awful at sleeping spells. This is one of the few times I could get the spell to work, but it lasted way too long." "I only meant for you to sleep for half an hour," she explained. 17 hours? Magic? Spells? Kenneth had never been so confused in his life, and he felt uneasy. "Are you saying there's magic? Because magic isn't real." Though now he wasn't sure what was real. Where was he, and why was he here? "I'm guessing you don't have magic in your universe?" Halo asked. "My universe? Like, as in more than one? Where am I? Am I in my universe or not?" he asked. His brain hurt trying to wrap his head around what Halo was saying. What was going on? "Yes, there are lots of universes. There used to be billions, but there are only a few thousand now," Halo replied. She frowned and said, "Kenneth, I need to explain something to you. So, I'm not sure about in your universe, but in most universes, magical people are Venenrius. There is a huge group of magical people who are against us, and they are called Intrius. And they use magic to destroy universes. No one knows how they do it, though," Halo explained. "So you said there were billions of universes, but now there's only thousands? Is that, like, the reason why?" Kenneth asked. He didn't see how this was relevant, but he longed to know why he wasn't home. "Yes. Okay, but why am I here? Where's my family?" Halo looked at her lap, frowning. "Well, you see, Kenneth fidgeted with his hands. Halo's nervousness was contagious. Halo glanced at Kenneth and back at her lap. She said, last night, the Venenrius said that one more universe was going to get destroyed, but it was too late, and all the Venenrius from this shelter were in other universes, so I got information about the universe, and I teleported to the only inhabited planet. I went to a random spot on the planet, and into the house. And I found, you. Me?" Kenneth asked. "Yes," Halo replied. "I made you fall asleep with a sleeping spell and took you back here. Only a few minutes after that, the universe got destroyed." Kenneth stared, his eyes wide open, and his jaw dropped at Halo. "They were all gone? So where's my family?" Halo looked like she was trying her best not to cry. "Kenneth, I'm so sorry," she said. "Tell me where my family is now," Kenneth demanded. Halo stared at him, her face looking devastated, and she nervously rubbed her hands together. I tried to be fast as I could, but I could only save you in time. It's my fault." Her eyes filled with tears, and she turned away. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Kenneth stared at her, not quite comprehending everything. "Halo, they're not..." Kenneth couldn't get the last word out. He felt like a cold hand reached into his chest, grabbed his heart and lungs. They died," Halo said, still looking away. "I'm sorry, but there wasn't enough time. I tried, but I couldn't," she added, and sobbed. Kenneth felt his heart and lungs tear out of his chest. "No, they're not. You're lying. You are. You have to be." No, he wouldn't accept that his family was gone. "They were here, somewhere. They had to be." "I had tried my best, but there wasn't enough time to save them," Halo whimpered. "There wasn't enough time? Why couldn't you have grabbed Gray? He's so light and small. Gray and Sterling sleep in the same room. Couldn't you have grabbed them?" Tears sat in Kenneth's eyes, too shocked for them to fall. Anger fell over him and he yelled. Gray was only 8 and Sterling only 10. He felt hatred towards this girl he didn't even know. More than hatred. He despised her. Halo didn't look at him or speak. "Hey," Kenneth tried to say her name, but he choked on a sob. It wasn't true. It couldn't be. His family had to be alive. She was lying. She had to be. I tried, but there was so little time. I grabbed the first person I saw. I didn't know it was you. I didn't know you had brothers." Halo cried, still not looking at Kenneth. Kenneth thought of his brothers, Gray's shaggy dark brown hair and cute freckles, Sterling's shaggy light brown hair and brave face. They were the world to him. Kenneth couldn't imagine a world where Gray and Sterling didn't exist. His whole family, just gone. In the spring, his dog Miles had been put down, and he had felt like it was the end of the world. But now, his family and every single person he knew was gone. His universe was gone, as if it had never existed. No, it wasn't fair. It couldn't be true. He felt infuriated that the Venenrius hadn't helped. Why hadn't Halo grabbed someone else? But more importantly, he was angry at himself for not telling his family that he loved them for a while. Kenneth got nauseous and dizzy, and things started getting a little fuzzy. He gripped the side of the flat wooden bed and stared at nothing. His thoughts overflowed his mind as if someone was dumping gallons of water into a shot glass. Thoughts of anger, sadness, his brothers, his parents, his world, guilt, regret, denial. There was nothing to live for. Why did Halo save him? Out of the billions of people in his world, why him? If he had died with his family, he would be dead with his brothers. But he was alive, without a family, or his brothers. A fate worse than death. Kenneth blinked as his vision became more blurry. Kenneth lay on his back on the flat wooden bed, and Halo was looking at him. He sat up. "You fainted. You should probably lay back down," Halo said. "Though I'm sure it was just a simple faint. It can happen because of stress and shock." "No," Kenneth said. He gripped the side of the wooden bed. Everything was still fuzzy, and it looked like a dream. "My mom was a nurse," Halo added, a pleading look on her face. "No offense, but I really don't care," Kenneth replied in a quiet voice. He still felt dizzy and nauseous. Shock still ran through him. "I have water bottles in my bag. Do you want some?" Halo asked. She attempted to make Kenneth lie down with her hand, but he didn't move. "I don't want water," Kenneth said. He would have liked something to drink, but he wasn't sure if he would be able to keep it down because of how nauseous he felt. "Are you sure?" "I'm fine," Kenneth said. He still thought of his family. Now he would never see them again. He should have been with them instead of doing homework that night. Homework that didn't matter now. How he should have told his brothers that he loved them before they'd gone to bed. He hated himself, loathed himself, and his stupid actions that couldn't be changed. Halo sat beside him. A few seconds passed, and she whispered, "I know how you feel." "Shut up! You will never know how I feel," he yelled back at her face. Halo jumped back, startled. Kenneth closed his eyes again, as another wave of nausea came over him. Another few silent seconds passed, and Halo whispered, "They killed my family too." Kenneth grinded his teeth. He shouldn't have immediately assumed Halo hadn't been through the same experience. Obviously, many people had. He looked at Halo and whispered, "Were they destroyed in your universe? Was she an orphan like him?" Kenneth realized he was an orphan, which was something he never imagined being. Halo nodded and said, "4 years ago. It was similar to what happened to you. I got saved from my universe minutes before it got destroyed." "My family wasn't saved in time either." She smiled at Kenneth. Her smile was sad, but comforting at the same time. "I'm sorry," was all Kenneth could say. Kenneth looked down. It felt like a long time before Kenneth looked up from his lap, which now had wet spots from tears. "I'm sorry for yelling at you," he apologized. He didn't feel nauseous anymore. Halo smiled up at him and said, "Is there any way I can help? I can leave and you could be alone, or I can get you something to eat." I have a few questions," Kenneth mumbled. You mentioned a sleeping spell. Is that all you know how to do, or can you do other spells?" He wanted to get his mind off of death. He didn't want to break down. He needed something to do, to walk around, work, do anything. Halo looked around and saw an old can of food. She stretched her hand and lifted her hand upwards. The can of food lifted off the ground and went up, following her hand. Kenneth stared in shock. It reminded him of the Force from Star Wars, which had been Sterling's favorite. Kenneth's eyes filled with tears. Halo moved her hand around, the can following her hand movement. Halo kept concentrating on the can, but said, "This is the floating, or hovering, or lifting spell." She pulled her hand away, and the can fell. She pushed her hand towards the can, and it rolled away. "Wow," Kenneth said under his breath. Kenneth immediately felt guilty for feeling a little joy. He thought he shouldn't be feeling it when his family would never be able to again. Halo looked at Kenneth and said, "I also know the shield spell, though it usually breaks when I try. I know the sleeping spell, but as I said, I'm bad at it. I'm trying to learn the light spell, but it's really hard. Other than that, I don't really know many spells. Sometimes I forget I'm a Venenrius because of how little I use my magic." Halo made a small laugh. Kenneth felt his lip twitch, though he wasn't in the mood to smile. "How do you learn spells?" Kenneth asked. "Well, whenever I want to learn a spell, I research it first. Venenrius have to have knowledge of the spell before they can learn it. Then I have to practice, which, depending on the spell, can take a week or many years. The pushing and floating spell took a couple of weeks. The shield spell usually requires a month to get kinda good at it, though I only practiced for 2.5 weeks, and I've been practicing the light spell for a few days and still can't get it to work. The light spell usually takes a couple of weeks to learn, so I'm not worried." Once Halo had finished, she stopped and waited for Kenneth to say something. Kenneth wrapped his head around this and said, "Okay, I guess that makes sense." He looked at his lap. He didn't want to sit silently staring at his lap. But he couldn't figure out how Halo had saved him from his universe. How do Venenrius travel? "Oh, well, there are these Oh, well, there's these rings, and they're called universe rings. You put them on your left hand, and then you basically tell it where to go. You don't have to be magical to use one. Anyone can. You can tell a ring what universe and planet and place to take you to. You can be less precise, like the universe number, or you can be very plain, though it's not recommended. Sometimes it can cause a ring to malfunction, which isn't good, Halo explained. Kenneth could finally figure out her accent. British. Interesting. Kenneth stared at nothing. Finally, to break the silence, he said, "Where are the Entrius, and why can't the Venenrius find their base, or wherever they attack? I'm sure the Venenrius would if they knew where the Entrius were. I mean, they find Entrius every once in a while, but rarely find bases or anything like that. The Entrius might have a central base and a leader, but nobody's sure. Sometimes the Entrius will take over a universe or a planet, if it would be useful. The Venenrius sometimes stop them, and sometimes for some reason they just don't care. Which confuses me," Halo explained. Kenneth took a deep breath, trying to calm himself down and stop himself from shaking. "So what do you do around here?" he asked. "I either entertain myself or I hang out with Dee. He's my friend. He goes on supply missions for a couple hours every day, though he is here at the moment. I completely understand if you don't want to, but would you like to meet him?" Halo asked. Kenneth didn't have any objections. He didn't care what they did. He rose to his feet and nodded as Halo stood, following her as she led him across the shelter. They walked down the aisle between people lying or sitting on identical wooden beds. They stepped over piles of glowing purple rocks. As they walked, Kenneth noticed something on Halo's left-hand fingers. "What's that on top of your fingers?" he asked. Halo stopped, looked at her left hand. She turned and said, "Oh, when a person gets recognized as a Venenrius, they get these tattoos." She held out her left hand to Kenneth. Designs were tattooed on the tops of her fingers. Dots, circles, squares, lines, squiggles, and triangles. "What does it mean?" Kenneth asked, staring at her hand. "I think it's random, but they are all unique. No Venenrius has the same designs as another. I think it's used to know and keep track of Venenrius." She turned and kept walking. I think it's used to know and keep track of Venenrius." Halo turned around and sat next to a boy who looked about Kenneth's age. Kenneth sat in front of him. First impression he had was that the guy looked like he was going to kill someone. He had overgrown, wavy, dark brown hair and small, deep green eyes. He wore a jacket with a crest of a hexagon on it. "So this is Dior, though everyone calls him Dee," Halo said with a smile on her face. Dior eyed Kenneth with an untrusting look on his face. "Dee, this is Kenneth." Halo stopped talking. She looked like she was trying to choose her words with care. "He's the boy I saved last night," she said at last. Dior looked at Halo. "Do you need something?" he said. "I wanted Kenneth to meet you." She smiled again. "And you need to meet new people," she added. Dior made a small forced smile at her and turned to Kenneth. "So, did you, know about magic or anything?" he said. "No, I didn't know about any of this," he replied. "My universe didn't have magic either, or at least until the Venenrius came and saved it," Dior said. Halo gave Kenneth a nervous smile that revealed straight teeth. She looked at Dior and said, "You boys talk. I'll get food." She stood and walked away. Could you get me some canned ham?" Dior called. "What's him?" Kenneth asked, staring puzzled at Dior. Kenneth hadn't thought that in other universes there would be food he hadn't heard of. Ham is a purple fruit. It's kind of mushy, but it's the best thing here. Canned ham is a ham that's canned, obviously, Dior explained. He turned away, grabbing a pen, and began drawing on a piece of metal. Kenneth stared at his lap for a few seconds, not thinking about anything, and just frowning at his lap. He looked at Dior and asked a random question. "So, how old are you?" Kenneth wasn't great at small talk, but he didn't want to sit in awkward silence. "Well, I just turned 16 a few months ago," Dior replied, still drawing on the piece of metal. Kenneth nodded and said, "I'm 15. I turned 15, 2 days ago." Kenneth assumed at least 2 days had passed because he had been asleep for that long. Halo also mentioned that his universe got destroyed yesterday. Thinking about that made his chest hurt. Dior nodded. "Halo's 14. I think her birthday's in February. You know what February is, right? Or are you from a universe where that doesn't exist?" He set the piece of metal and the pen on the ground beside him. Kenneth nodded and said, "I know what months are. It's August." He looked at what Dior had drawn on the piece of metal. Dior had sketched a sitting dog in that short amount of time. Halo sat down beside Dior. She glanced at the drawing with a smile and said to Kenneth, "I hope you like him." She smiled at Kenneth, but her eyes looked sad. He felt that she was reading his mind and knew he was thinking about his family. Kenneth forced a smile on his face. He didn't want to spread his sadness to everyone else. He grabbed the open can of him that Halo had handed to him. Inside was a purple mush. It looked gross, but he ate it anyway. He didn't want to complain and he didn't want to seem rude by not eating it, though he assumed he already looked rude. And he didn't want to seem rude by not eating it, but he assumed he already looked rude.